Alright, my dude, so we are back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake. So, the last few days, I've seen this article a few times from comicbook.com discussing whether or not Remake Part 2 is going to be releasing sooner than we think. And now, before we even get into the meat of the video, I'm just going to tell you right out, what they're talking about in this article is what we've already been talking about for a very, very long time. Nothing in this article itself is new. And of course, whenever I say we, I mean us, like the community, not just like us here on the channel or people that watch my videos. Like, what we've been talking about since pretty much like the end of 2020 all the way through 2021, we've been talking about Remake Part 2 is probably going to come out sometime after Final Fantasy 16, and that's kind of what this article is about. And they're citing a weird source. And what I mean by that is they're citing this like supposedly reputable leaker, and I say supposedly just because I don't think I've ever heard of the guy. And they link to his channel where he does a podcast. His name is Nate the Hate. Now, I don't know anything about the guy's track record in terms of leaking, but they're citing him as a source for this article. But I watched the part of his podcast, because he just does podcast videos, where he talks about the PS5 stuff in regards to Square Enix, Final Fantasy 16, Remake Part 2, but it's all speculation. It even tells you, I believe it's in the title, it's in the thumbnail, it's in the timestamps of the description of the video. It talks about it being speculation. It's not like he's citing some sort of anonymous source, unless at some part within this whole podcast he does say that. Again, I didn't watch the whole thing, it's an hour and a half. I just skipped to the part where he's talking about Remake. Unless he mentions a source somewhere else, like at least in this part of the video, he's just speculating on when he thinks Remake Part 2 and 16 are going to come out. And to be clear, this video itself is not about Nate the Hate. This is about the comicbook.com article, but then we might come back to some of the stuff that he does say at some point, but I want to read over this article kind of quickly. So it starts out with, Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 will reportedly be a PS5 exclusive. No shit. Following in the footsteps of its predecessor, which was and is a PS4 exclusive. This isn't very surprising. What's surprising is its alleged release window. The current expectation is that the next Final Fantasy game, Final Fantasy 16, will release sometime this year via the PS5. If this happens, Final Fantasy fans will enjoy 2 years of Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2, because a new report suggests the latter could be out in 2023. Given that the former will only release in the second half of this year at the earliest, and given how long development took on Final Fantasy VII Remake, this, if true, will shock many. So again, the article, they're talking about it being reported that, some insider is saying that it's coming out in 2023. But again, as I already showed you earlier in the video, Nate's thumbnail, his title, and the description of his video is talking about predictions. These are guesses, their thoughts, what they think is going to happen. Him and the guy he does a podcast with are just talking about 16 coming out sometime this year, and then maybe we get a trailer or teaser or whatever it is for Remake Part 2, and then at the end of that teaser/trailer, they throw up 2023 on screen to let people know that 2023 is when the game's coming out, to kind of get people hyped. That is legitimately all they say. I've sat here and listened to the whole 10-minute segment that they have in the timestamp of the video. 45 minutes to 55 minutes. They don't ever say anything definitively, or that they have this information, this inside info. The scuttlebutt, which is a great word, but weird to use here, comes the way of well-known leaker Nate the Hate, who notes that ultimately, the game's release depends on the release of Final Fantasy 16. In other words, if Final Fantasy 16 gets delayed to 2023, it will likely delay Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2. The leaker also notes that there will be no PS4 version of the game, which isn't very surprising considering Final Fantasy 16 is a PS5 exclusive. So for starters, at no instance in the part of the video that I watched did he ever talk about 16 having any sort of impact on Remake Part 2, as in, if 16 gets delayed, Remake Part 2 gets delayed, because it doesn't make any sense, because they're being developed by completely different teams. Now, I'm sure Square Enix does, of course, want 16 to come out first, and then Remake Part 2 afterwards. We talked about that for the longest time. I'm sure that's what they want, but I don't see why 16 getting constantly pushed back and delayed would have any real impact on Part 2. And after a certain amount of time, they gotta release one of them. If, in a hypothetical situation, Remake Part 2 got finished before 16, 16 still being developed, they're not just gonna leave Part 2 sitting on the shelf because 16's gotta come out first. And we've even talked about here on the channel about the potential of Part 2 coming out before 16, which I do think is still a possibility. I mean, we got the reveal trailer and stuff for 16, right? And we've got some decent information here and there in the year and a half almost that the game got revealed. It was October 2020, if I'm not mistaken. We got some info here and there, but it to me, it's starting to feel almost like the reveal of, Remake. Remake got revealed in 2015, and that game didn't come out till 2020. And I'm not saying it's going to take that long for 16 to come out, but, it's kind of weird that we ain't seen anything yet. How far behind is 16? If we just use Remake Part 1 as a comparison, barring the initial reveal in 2015, when they really started talking about Remake in 2019, May 2019 to be specific, with State of Play, and we got that teaser. Like, it was constant information until the game came out. Like, they were never, like, not talking about the fucking game. If we just pretend like State of Play was the reveal of Remake Part 1, then the game was revealed and came out in less than a year. May 2019, it came out April 2020. The more time that passes without any information for 16, it just feels like the typical situation where Square Enix, or really any game developer, shows the game far fucking too early. Not to blow smoke on my own ass here, but I remember whenever we got the reveal for 16 and we found out it was Yoshi P and some other people that are, working on Final Fantasy 14 that are also making 16, they threw up red flags for me then. I think I said in that video, talking about how, like, how's that going to work? Because, 14 is an MMO. It's a constantly updating game, constant new content. How's that going to work? And people, doubted me, but here we are, 2022, not really anything for 16. The report is capped with a note that Square Enix is pushing its teams to release games quicker. Of course, to do this, ambition or quality typically take a back seat. Final Fantasy fans will hope it's the former. Final Fantasy fan here, I hope neither of them take a back seat. I don't want ambition or quality to take a back seat. I want them to be ambitious and try new things with Remake Part 2 or Final Fantasy 16, whatever it might be. I want them to try new things. I don't want just the same thing. I don't want necessarily just Remake Part 1 done again in new locations. I want a similar style game for sure. I want it to be maybe 80% similar with 20% new things. I want them to be ambitious with their games and try new shit. I think most people do want that. So quit speaking for us. Now, on the topic of Square Enix wanting to get games out quicker, for starters, he actually does say this. I did hear this in that 10-minute segment. But also, it's a double-edged sword, because obviously we want to play these games. We want to play Remake Part 2 right now. I want to be playing that game yesterday. But the faster they get it out, the less quality it is going to be overall. And the less things they're going to put into the game if they're just trying to get it out by a certain date. Nobody wants that. Do we want the game to come out in 2023? You're absolutely right. I hope to be seeing shit about this game this year with a release date next year. But if the game's got to be pushed to 2024 to put more things into it, to make it a better quality game, then yeah, we can all agree on that. It's going to fucking suck to wait another year, but that's what needs to happen. I think something else that's somewhat interesting is that if you actually look at their current fiscal year, they've not had any major releases from April 1st of 2021 until now. There's just not been any major games. Now, they're going to have Stranger of Paradise coming out in March of this year, which is going to be right before their fiscal year ends on the 31st of March. But other than that game, nothing's really major, unless maybe you consider, I guess, Babylon's Fall major release, but I don't know how hyped that game is. And the point of bringing that up is, if they are trying to push out games sooner, this can maybe be why. Because again, they've gone a whole fiscal year without any major release. Now, I'm sure financially they're okay, because they have several mobile games that are probably making them an insane amount of money. And towards the end of the article, they go on to say the grain of salt bullshit, and then they say that they don't know where the inside information ends and the speculation begins, despite the word prediction being all over this goddamn video. To me, whenever I look at this article, it feels like this person who wrote the article, Tyler Fisher, by the way, had a fucking deadline. It's like, Tyler, you gotta put something out, dude. You gotta do your job. And he's like, what can I make a video on? And it's YouTube search Final Fantasy VII Remake, came across Nate's video and was like, I'll make an article. I'll write about it. Look, ultimately, when it comes to this article, if what was said in this article was true, if these were things that Nate said, if it was inside information from Nate, or whatever the case, none of it's new. This is stuff, I said this earlier in the video, this is stuff we've been talking about since, the reveal of 16. In 2020, the end of 2020, as soon as 16 was revealed, we're like, okay, 16's coming out first, and then Remake sometime after that. And then for the longest time now, it's been speculated, even before 16 came out, that Remake was going to release probably 2023 or later. None of this is new. No offense to anybody involved in this article or the video that we're talking about within this video, but nothing here is new information. None of this is original information or thoughts. These are things the community's been talking about for almost a year and a half. That's going to be the video. So, of course, my dudes, I want to pass off to you. What are your thoughts? Is Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 releasing sooner than we think, which is 2023, which is exactly what we think? Now, if we want to ask a real question here towards the end of the video, do you think the delay of 16 would have any sort of impact on Remake? Do you think if they pushed 16 back, delayed it, would they also then delay Part 2? My dudes, that's going to be the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys aren't new. Once I did more Final Fantasy VII Remake content, turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter, @DavidYT, and my Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description. Into the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.